Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Merry Christmas, my darlings. On this glorious Christmas Day, I bring you another story by Father Cook and Magister Alexander. A Holly Jolly Christmas by Ken Lewis. If you're going to keep me tied to this chair, at least give me the dignity of letting me wear my hat, my wife hissed at me while she nodded to the green stocking cap at her feet, the one shaped like a Christmas tree. I picked up the hat and placed it gently on her head. Then I repositioned it just how she liked it, slightly to the left side with the top folded neatly so the giant golden bell rested against her shoulder. "Thank you," she said as I adjusted the string of lights that bound her to the dining room chair. "Are they too tight?" I asked. I felt bad that I had to tie her up. I can go out to the garage and get that nylon cord we used to tie the tarps down. "I'm fine, but I'd feel much better if you untied me. I'm not going to hurt anyone. I just want to spread a little Yuletide cheer." "I love you, but you know I can't do that. You can't leave the house since you decided to sneak into the Johnsons' home and redecorate their tree." "Have you seen their tree? It was hideous." "What about the Greenbergs' house?" "They didn't have a tree at all, so I gave them one." "They're Jewish. Jewish people don't like trees?" I couldn't tell if that was supposed to be a joke or not. I could have continued to list the neighbors she had scared or annoyed, but what was any point? She felt justified in everything she had done. "We're lucky everyone declined to press charges. As long as you agreed to stay under voluntary house arrest until Christmas was over," I reminded her. "I didn't agree to that. You did." She spat the words at me. "I would never agree to something that would prevent me from enjoying the holidays." I didn't have a choice. Your version of enjoying the holidays involves breaking and entering our neighbors' homes. She turned her head away from me, clearly annoyed that I had sided against her. "If you won't untie me, could you at least plug these in?" she asked and indicated the string of lights I used to tie her up. Several seconds later, she added, "Please." "If it will make you happy, then I will gladly plug them in for you," I said, as I grabbed an extension cord from the closet. "Let me know if they get too hot," I said once the lights were plugged in. I waited a few minutes to make sure she was okay, then went into the kitchen to pour myself a drink. As I walked away, I could hear her start to hum, "Oh, Christmas Tree." I poured a shot of whiskey and downed it in one gulp. I was about to pour another when I heard the doorbell ring out the tune Carol of the Bells. My wife replaced the old bell shortly after she became obsessed with decorating for the holidays. I opened the door to find two gentlemen standing on my porch, both dusted with a fine layer of snow. One of them was a priest, the other a tall, thin man dressed entirely in black, clutching a leather satchel to his side. I had decided to contact them after I read an article on the internet about a woman whose son was possessed by an angel. I've tried everything else, so why not an exorcism? I can't think of any other explanation for why she started acting the way she had. She always loved Christmas, but not as obsessively as she had been that week. It was like she was possessed by Santa Claus. "Mr. Hudson?" the tall man asked when he reached out with his left hand. "I'm Theodore Alexander, and this is Father Cook," he said, and nodded towards the priest beside him. "Please call me Ben," I said, and shook Mr. Alexander's hand, then offered my hand to Father Cook. "Please come in." Should I call you Magister? I asked Mr. Alexander after I shut the door. I'm a little confused on the protocol here. I didn't know satanic priests like you existed until I read that article about you. He laughed. Mr. Alexander is fine if that makes you more comfortable. Wow, you weren't kidding. Mr. Alexander glanced around the room at all of the Christmas decorations. Every available space seemed to be filled with a variety of holiday ornaments. Is every room decorated like this? Yep, even the bathrooms, I said. She also tried to decorate several of the neighbors' houses, I added, thinking it might help shed some light on whatever might be wrong with her. I see that most of the decorations are of some commercial characters. There are different versions of Santa, Frosty, the reindeer, and elves, but I don't see any of the usual religious decorations. No mangers, crosses, or angels, Father Cook noted while surveying the room. And trees, Mr. Alexander added. There are a lot of Christmas trees. Is that significant? I asked. Potentially, Mr. Alexander replied. The entities we deal with tend to surround themselves with religious symbols that can often be used to identify where they came from. I hung their coats on the rack and led them into the living room, where my wife was tied up. When they saw her bound to the chair, Christmas lights blinking all around her, they looked at each other and then over at me. She asked me to turn the lights on, I said while I took a detour to the kitchen to grab the whiskey and some glasses. When I got your message, I didn't have much time to prepare, and there were plenty of lights lying around, so I shrugged. The rest they could figure out for themselves. I returned to the living room and set the whiskey and glasses down on the coffee table. I sat in the recliner next to the couch and poured myself another drink. Mr. Alexander and Father Cook waved off my offer to pour one for them. I like the lights, she said to the men as they sat on the couch facing her. They help illuminate all of the beautiful decorations, and they make me feel so festive. They are quite lovely, Mrs. Hudson, Mr. Alexander said. I have to ask, why all of the trees? Thank you, she responded politely before answering his question. I figured two religious boys like you would already know the answer to that. It was, after all, your religion that appropriated the tree for yourselves. Our religion? Father Cook asked before glancing over at Mr. Alexander. The look they exchanged indicated a piece of the puzzle may have been handed to them. Don't be coy, Father. You know I'm talking about Christianity. She sounded a little annoyed. You boys are different sides of the same coin as far as I'm concerned. Your patchwork religion was built out of the pieces of the ones you destroyed. That tree and its place in the home was a tradition long before your God showed up. I sat quietly in my chair and sipped my whiskey while I listened, and wondered where the conversation was headed. That was obviously not my wife, and it started to frighten me. I'd shared my bed with whatever she'd become. That gave me chills. Ben, Mr. Alexander raised his voice to get my attention when I had failed to answer the question he had just asked me. What? I said as I returned from my muddled thoughts. The alcohol had started to take effect. Is there somewhere we can talk privately? He repeated. Oh, yeah, I thought for a moment. How about the garage, I suggested. Our house was small and the interior walls didn't block sound very well. Bring the icicles when you come back inside, my wife said as we filed past her on the way to the garage. There should be a box of them in the trunk. Once we were all in the garage, I leaned against the hood of the car, arms crossed, and waited for one of them to speak. This is much easier on the eyes, Father Cook remarked when he noticed the garage was free of Christmas decorations. I come out here sometimes to get away from that. I nodded towards the house. It's the only place I could keep her from decorating. I'd spend a lot of time out here as well under the circumstances, Father Cook smiled. I know Christmas decorations are the last thing you want to talk about, but I do have to ask about them. Specifically the bells. It didn't occur to me until just now how many of your decorations have been enhanced with bells. Have bells always been a big part of our decorations? Mr. Alexander asked. Not that I recall. I mean, we always had a few decorations with bells, but nothing like you see in there now. The doorbell, I noticed, it played the Carol of the Bells. How long have you had that? Father Cook asked. She bought that a couple of days ago. I couldn't keep my curiosity in check and asked, what do bells have to do with all of this? Bells have been known to play a significant role in many ancient religions, and they may have been the religious symbol we overlooked when we walked in. Mr. Alexander placed his hand on his chin as a thought occurred to him. When you called, you mentioned your wife was a music teacher, right? Yes, well, she's currently on leave of absence. I waved my hand in the air, for obvious reasons. Has your wife come into contact with any strange instruments recently? Strange? No, I don't think so. Strange may not be the right word. It could be something simple like an antique, Father Cook elaborated. A better question might be, has she brought home any new instruments? No, I started to say, but all the talk about the bells triggered my memory. She did bring home some bells. I didn't really think of them as musical instruments, but technically they were. Actually, she started acting weird. She brought home this little wooden box with 3 bells in it, the kind that have handles on them. I tried to pantomime what I was talking about. There was also a little sheet of music tucked to the side. I remember her showing it to me. She picked it up at the thrift store. I rushed back into the house, which left the 2 men with puzzled expressions on their face. I ran into the front room and grabbed the box where my wife left it sitting on the table in the foyer. When I returned, I held out to Mr. Alexander with 2 hands. This is it. In my excitement to show them the box, I accidentally left the door open, which prompted my wife to yell out, What about the icicles? I went and closed the door as Mr. Alexander inspected the outside of the box. It appears to be hand-carved, and these patterns along the outside appear to be Germanic or possibly Norse. If this is authentic, it's very old and very valuable. I'm surprised someone donated this to a thrift store. He carefully opened the lid to reveal the 3 ornate bronze bells nestled inside. Instead of removing a bell, he slid the piece of parchment out and handed the box to Father Cook. He started to smile as he looked over the single piece of sheet music. I could tell he found the answer he was looking for. When he finished with his examination, he retrieved the box from Father Cook and handed him the piece of paper. These are summoning bells. Mr. Alexander indicated the box that held the instruments. And that, he pointed to the sheet of music, works as the incantation. Your wife must have used the bells to play the song. That is what allowed the Solstice Spirit to possess her. The what? I inquired. Old nature spirits, Father Cook explained. Thousands of years before God came to earth, humans worshiped various nature deities. Solstice spirits were the emissaries for many of these old gods. But our God is a jealous God, Mr. Alexander cut in. When he arrived, he demanded loyalty from everyone, including those entities. Most of them were powerless to resist him and were forced to join his cause. Today we call some of those spirits angels. Those that opposed him joined the ranks of the serpent's demon horde, or were driven into the deepest and darkest crevices between heaven and hell, rarely to be seen. Okay, I said, drawing out the word. But what does that have to do with Christmas and all of these damn decorations? Solstice spirits are not normally malevolent. In fact, many of them were summoned to help in times of need, or to give thanks, or just to celebrate the changing of the seasons, Father Cook explained. The problem with this spirit, Mr. Alexander continued where Father Cook left off, is that it has probably been thousands of years since it has seen the world, and now it's like a kid in a candy store. It thinks it was summoned to celebrate the winter solstice. That's why it's focusing on the non-religious symbols of Christmas. And that is also why it has been trying to force those things on your neighbors as well. Let me stop you right there, I said before he could continue. Assuming everything you just told me is true, can you save my wife? I've never encountered a Solstice Spirit before, but I do believe we can save her, Mr. Alexander answered. So if it isn't an angel or a demon, which one of you is going to perform the exorcism? I asked. An exorcism won't work on your wife. Solstice spirits aren't bound by the same laws of order that govern angels and demons, Father Cook answered. Then how are you going to save her? Mr. Alexander smiled. I hate when you smile like that, Father Cook said. If the lore is correct, Solstice spirits are essentially bullies. They don't like to be told what to do. They want to be able to do what they want whenever they want, and they will do everything in their power to make sure they get their way. So, if you are faced with a bully, what's the best way to make the bully stop? Mr. Alexander's smile grew. You get a bigger bully. What? I ran my hand through my hair. Maybe I've had too much to drink, but I'm not following you. What he's saying, Father Cook said, is that he wants to scare the spirit out of your wife. How does that work? I was extremely skeptical. It's a spirit. What could possibly scare it off? Christmas is all about celebrating, spreading joy to those around us, and forgiving the small trespasses of life. That is what the Solstice Spirit wants to embody in its twisted way. I plan to summon a spirit that is the opposite of that, Mr. Alexander explained. I figured that's why you were smiling. Father Cook pointed his finger at Mr. Alexander. If you're going to do what I think you're going to do, you'll need to warn him about the risks. Don't forget about what happened the last time you summoned something outside of our domain. That was a fluke. I didn't expect the boy to actually invite it in. Whatever they were talking about seemed to be an old point of contention between the two of them. I seriously doubt Mrs. Hudson would do something like that. What are you talking about? I was getting tired. I didn't know how much more of this craziness I could take. There's only one spirit I know capable of sending the Solstice Spirit running back to whatever dark cave it crawled out of. A spirit that embodies fear, death, and isolation. A spirit called Soin. I just stared at Mr. Alexander until he explained. A Soin is a type of harvest spirit. Like the Solstice Spirit is free from the rules of religion that govern us. He pointed to Father Cook, then back to himself as he said the last word. You would probably know it better as a Halloween spirit. He looked over at the priest when he spoke again. Father Cook is concerned that we won't be able to banish it before it tries to fill the vacancy left in your wife when the Solstice Spirit flees. That sounds insane. Can't we just bargain with it and get it to leave on its own? If it's a Christmas spirit, won't it just leave when Christmas is over? It might not. Think about it this way. If I gave you the keys to your favorite car and said, bring it back whenever, how long would you drive it before giving it up? Mr. Alexander had a point. Plus, I didn't think I could handle another day of her holiday cheer. There's no telling how long this thing plans on staying. We can try and wait it out, or we can force it out tonight. I took a deep breath and exhaled. All right, let's do it, I said. If I were in her place, I'd want you to get out of me as quickly as possible. I couldn't believe this was really happening. What's next? Is there some sort of contract I have to sign? I remembered reading that the woman who saved her son had to sign a contract. No contract required. The question obviously amused Mr. Alexander. What we're about to do is not sanctioned by either of our churches, so no payment is required. He held up the box of bells. But I will be taking these with me. You can think of it as payment if you like. That's fine with me, I said. When do we get started? First, we need to make sure the Soin Spirit feels welcome when it's summoned. That will help to ensure it remains tethered to the house long enough for it to become aware of the Solstice Spirit's presence. How do we do that? First, we need to clear the house of all the Christmas decorations, Mr. Alexander explained. Then we need to redecorate with those. He pointed to the large boxes labeled Halloween stacked in the corner of the garage. And just in case, Mr. Alexander looked at Father Cook, indicating he was about to say was for his benefit. We need to lock up all of the knives. He paused for a moment before adding, and the forks. Aren't you forgetting something? Father Cook looked at him with raised eyebrows. I was going to get to that. I just wanted to wait until everything else was ready. Mr. Alexander seemed mildly annoyed. What is he talking about? I asked. Summoning a Soin Spirit requires a certain type of investment, Mr. Alexander explained. It takes a little more incentive besides a few ancient phrases to get it to appear. What kind of investment? I was afraid to ask. Was that cat food in the bowl I saw sitting on the kitchen floor? So quoth this raven. Oh, that poor kitty. I don't think they should do that. Anyway, my darlings, I do hope you have a wonderful Christmas, that you get everything you want. My thanks to Ken Lewis for his holly jolly story for us today. Go let him know you enjoyed it on Reddit. And if you like my videos, my darlings, please give it a thumbs up so that I know you liked it. If you leave me a comment, I always do my best to comment back. Please subscribe and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will see you next time, my darlings. Bye-bye.